So Mayor, many citizens are concerned about the economy in Calgary right now and the unemployment issue. So what plans do you have to address those concerns?
You know, the first plank of my platform is about building a better economy. And we all know, if we live here, that the last couple of years have been really rough. The economists tell us that the recession ended about 6 months ago.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure people are really feeling that. We added tens of thousands of jobs this summer. Our unemployment rate is no longer the highest in the country, but it's still too high. And so we have to be able to address that. Too many of our neighbors are feeling the pain of unemployment, uncertainty about the future.
Yeah.
But there's also a very specific problem for the city, and that is the downtown vacancy rate.
Yeah.
For a long time, we had basically 0% vacancy in our downtown core. And as a result, the downtown was paying about 50% of all of the business taxes in Calgary. So businesses outside of the downtown were paying comparatively less. And when the assessment values go down in the downtown core, it means everyone else automatically has to make up for it because everyone pays the same rate.
Okay.
So a lot of businesses outside the downtown were feeling a lot of pressure with upward pressure on taxes.
Yeah.
And so this year, Council was able to use our savings to cap the business tax increase. We froze residential taxes and we capped business taxes at 5%.
Yeah.
We won't be able to do that forever. So we have to fill those downtown office spaces. So that's part of what I have been working on and intend to continue working on, is selling Calgary to external investment and businesses that want to come here,
Yeah.
but also encouraging Calgarians to start their own business, to start to fill up those spaces, to sell their goods and services internationally from Calgary. I'll give you an interesting example, which is that DHL, the big freight company, the big courier company, has opened their largest airside terminal in Canada in Calgary at the Calgary airport. And when I talked to them about it, they only do international shipments. They said a very large portion of their business is to and from China. And I just assumed it was all stuff from China coming here. And they said, no, about half of our business is small businesses in Calgary that are selling to China. And so we have to be able to encourage even more of that. The other big thing about the economy is we have to keep investing in building infrastructure. So this summer, if anyone was driving around Calgary, they were probably cursing at all the road construction that's going on. But it's actually very much on purpose, because we were able to deploy money we saved in the good times to build infrastructure now when construction costs are lower than they were 5 years ago, and when people are unemployed. And so we've spent $2 billion on improving roads and transit and social infrastructure in Calgary this summer. And this is, I think, exactly the right thing to do to start to kickstart the economy again.
Yeah. That sounds good, but in the meantime, the business communities is worried about the amount of taxes they have to pay. Is that going to change, or what would you say to those business owners that have to carry that makeup right now?
This really is the biggest problem a new council is going to face, because we were able to cap those business taxes this year.
Yeah.
We probably have enough money to do it again for another year, maybe another 2 years.
Okay.
But we can't do it forever.
Right.
And so we really have to change the systematic problem here, which is that downtown vacancy. So it's really filling those downtown office buildings that will ultimately lead to less pressure on the businesses outside of downtown.
Yeah. So as Calgary continues to develop its trade relations with China, how would you balance the economic development
with the human rights
and human rights?
You know, it's really important to do that. What a lot of people don't know about me is that long before I was mayor, I was a big human rights activist. And in fact, when I became mayor, I questioned, all right, how do we move forward, even on my first trip to China? How do we move forward these conversations? And I talked to a lot of people who are very prominent in the human rights sphere and said, how do you manage this? And their advice really was, you've got to keep engaging, but you always, always talk about human rights issues. So I remember sitting in boardrooms of very, very large Chinese companies, big energy companies, for example. And they were asked me the question. They said, how do we gain social license for our investments in Canada? And I said, well, you have to point to your, and you have to do it in a certain way to have that conversation. But I said you have to point to your labor record, your human rights record, your environmental record. And of course, under the surface, that means you have to have a good labor record, a good human rights record, and a good environment record. And I think those very large Chinese companies have gotten the message. And I know that Canadian politicians have been engaging on this question at many levels. I'm just a mayor of what would be a tiny rural village in China, given the size, scale, scope of what we do. But in the audiences that I get, it's a message that I always bring home. And we often find as well that the environmental angle is a great way to start a conversation about human rights. Because I think folks in government there have actually now realized that clean air, clean water is very important. And drawing the linkage between that and human rights, I think, is one way to continue moving this this topic forward.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. I think that is a good approach. That is a good approach.
Many people are impatient and they say that's not good enough. But I actually believe that disengaging from the economic conversations doesn't serve us. And if we can use the economic relationship as an opportunity to share our values, that probably can move us further.
Also, right now, there is an increasing awareness in the international communities of China's persecution of Falun Gong and the organ pillaging of Falun Gong practitioners. And it impacts such a significant number of people, including the family members, relatives, and friends of some Calgary residents with Chinese heritage. So as a mayor, how could you use your influence to help those being affected Calgarians?
I think this particular one is really something that we have to pressure the federal government on, because these relationships really belong in the realm of the federal government. But I will say one thing, which is that one of the great things about being here is the opportunity to have freedom of speech, to raise these issues and raise awareness of these issues. And I think that folks who are concerned about Falun Dafa and what's happening there really should, as they do, use that opportunity to really raise awareness with Canadian citizens so that the citizens can put pressure on the federal government.
Thank you. And also in the Northwest, there is a dense Chinese population, and many Chinese living there are concerned about the lack of sports facilities, public transit, and good schools in general. And in your platform, is there anything specific that you could address those?
Yes, the schools I don't have much to do with. That is the Board of Education. But the other two are absolutely things we're working on. So I'm really excited about the new rec facility in Rocky Ridge on Country Hills Boulevard. If you haven't gone by it, go by it. It is really a stunning building, and it's going to make a huge difference for people. Meanwhile, we continue to work on the largest public transit investment in our history, a big part of which is the Green Line. And when the Green Line continues northbound, it will serve a huge amount of people along the Centre Street spine, including people in Sandstone, Beddington, Country Hills area, Panorama, Harvest Hills, and so on. It'll even go to the TNT. And so I think that'll make a big difference for people as we continue to do that. Now, that is a very big project, and it's going to take many, many years to build. But I hope that we will be able to be serving those communities towards the end of the next decade. It'll take about 10 years to build phase one, but my hope is that we'll be able to secure the funding for the next phases before we're finished. So we'll just keep building, and we'll be able to get to those areas no later than the late 2020s.
During the Mayor Forum debate, and the unity and the effectiveness of the City Council as a whole was being questioned. So what's your response towards that?
It's sort of a weird question to bring up because with one exception, which is the issue of secondary suites, this council has actually really moved the ball forward in a very significant way. So to give you an example, Mayor Bronconnier, Mayor Dewar, Mayor Klein, Mayor Sykes, Mayor Alger, 5 mayors, never passed a unanimous budget. There's always been division. I actually passed 2 unanimous budgets because we were able to bring council together and say, look, this is what's right for the community. Similarly, if you remember in 2013, the election was very much based on this issue of the suburban sprawl subsidy and how we weren't charging developers who were building in the outlying areas of the city enough to pay for all the infrastructure.
Right.
And when it came time to fix that, which we did in 2014, and that came to council, 2015, excuse me, early 2015, when that came to council, it also passed unanimously. So the bitter issue that we fought an election on, in the end, I was able to help bring all of council to the light on this and make it work. So I think this council's actually been very effective. Yes, the first 10 minutes of every council meeting, which is question period, sometimes get a little scrappy, but as soon as that's over, people sit down and get the work done.
So to you, this is just normal process of
it's
how
politics.
council works.
It's politics, and we should focus on the outcomes, not on whether everybody's friends with everybody else.
Right. So finally, would you like to say something to the Epoch Times readers?
Well, listen, thank you for taking your time and talking to me. You know, as citizens of Calgary, we are concerned about what happens in our community, but we are also concerned about the world and what happens in the world. And as Canadians, I think that's very ingrained in our DNA. But we also live in a world that is increasingly divided. We live in a world where voices of anger and bitterness and hatred seem to be growing louder and louder. And I never thought in my lifetime that I would see issues like racism and sexism and homophobia and religious bigotry gain strength. I thought those were on the out. But we're seeing that. And I think it's incredibly important for Calgarians to understand that we are not immune to this. You know, this summer we had 3 or 4 marches against Muslims in downtown Calgary. I get nasty racist comments every day. I never used to. And in the last year or two, I get them every day. So we have to remember as Calgarians that we're not immune to these global forces.
Right.
And those of us who believe in pluralism and diversity, we have to make sure that we're not shouted down by the small-minded and the intolerant voices. And we have to continue that fight every single day. And I think we might have gotten a bit complacent. I think we as a group might have said, you know, things are fine here. And we have to remember that things are not always fine here, and they're not always fine in other places, but we have to use the rights that we have in a responsible way to make sure we're fighting for the dignity of every human being.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Mayor.
Thank you.